Since you've seen the evolution of technologies, have you seen the changes in people as well?
One thing that's changed a lot is the sort of balance of power to go off and fire up their own SaaS software in their team. Over time, IT sort of got a lot of the power back. And then we lost it again. It's a cycle. So I think AI is the latest round of that. But here's the thing that I think really has not changed. The role of IT to me is to be that connection between business problems and technology solutions.
Yeah.
And I think AI in some ways makes it even more important.
Hello, welcome to Atomic Conversations. I am Lenin Gali, Chief Business Officer at Atomic Work. And we're here today with Karl. And Karl is ex-CIO at Gainsight. And Karl, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate you joining upon my request on a short notice.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that we're going to have an excellent conversation because there's so many things happening, especially with you and then with the AI and with all of the things that are happening around us. And just having a few minutes of chat before this podcast, recording. And I think, even just starting to think about what's possible, all of that is really fascinating with AI nowadays. But obviously, this has become a information overload. And what I wanted to really have, through this conversation, is really bring your story, your life story, your CIO journey, and also talk about, how you see what's happening around us, coming from 3 decades of experience, 4 decades, and whatever. And to where we're heading in the next 2 decades. And I really want to get your insights, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, should be fun.
All right, awesome. So starting with, I know when I learned that as a teenager, you somehow got introduced, interested in computers, and since then you've now spent the almost 3 decades plus working with computers. Yeah. Can you help walk through how you got into it to begin with as a teenager and in 80s,
Yeah, it's interesting. Nobody goes to school to be an IT person.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Everyone comes to this in their own path.
Yeah.
And my particular path was just being a computer hobbyist as a kid. But I was a particular kind of nerd. Which is that I really was kind of a database nerd.
Yeah.
So I was the kind of kid who wanted to keep track of my baseball cards in a database.
Okay.
But it turns out that's a very good kind of nerd to be if you want to get a great job.
It's a combination though. It's like, you're a nerd of the cards and other things,
right,
which is actually a hobby that actually is very interesting. Plus organizing all of that is another skill altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it turns out that databases and organizing information and getting at it is a really useful life skill if you want to have a career in IT.
Yeah.
So it worked out nicely. And I started really at a very young age, starting a small consulting company and really learning a lot on the job.
Yeah.
Just going out and working with business people to understand their problems and craft solutions.
Yeah.
And that's the essence of what we really do. And it's why I think AI is just the latest technology, but in some ways what we do never changes.
Yeah.
Because it's always bridging the gap between the business needs and the technology solutions. And that never changes. And it was the same when it was writing, database applications, when it was writing web applications, and now with AI. It's just a new tool in our toolbox to solve business problems with.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know you spent quite a bit of your career at Cadence.
Yeah.
You also were a geek and nerd, like you said, and then you worked in your way into becoming an engineer and then eventually manager, and then kind of gotten into the IT technology space and managing that. When you were growing up, like you said, you never thought you would actually become an IT guy, but but you could have taken a different path altogether.
Sure.
Right? You could have gone into engineering and, in a different way of building products and other things like many others do. But you chose to be in the IT side of it.
Yeah.
And that's how you got it. Is that by choice or is it?
I think it was. I think the thing is that now I'm old enough to recognize this. I don't know if I could have articulated it when I was younger, but really, first of all, I'm a very curious person, which I've come to realize is maybe the most important attribute. When I hire, I really look for that.
Yeah.
Because I think if you have curiosity and common sense, if you have common sense, curiosity, and people skills, you can go far.
Yes.
The rest you can figure out.
Yeah.
And I was the kind of person who was just fascinated by how things work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started a small company when I was quite young to do business consulting with people and build systems for them. And that got me into building a legal time and billing system. And then I got to learn how a law firm really works. And then I would work for a title insurance company and learn how title insurance works.
Yeah.
And what I realize now is that I'm the kind of person who's happier being broad rather than deep.
Yeah.
So if you want to go deep, be an engineer and choose an area and be an expert on it.
Yeah.
But if you have the kind of personality that you like to know everything, IT is actually a great place to be.
Yes.
Especially if you have a mind that appreciates complex systems.
I agree.
So understanding how all the different pieces of the business tie together and therefore how the systems need to tie together, to me, that's the fun part.
That's a great way to put it, right? I mean, obviously, when you look at it, I mean, we all came, and I was an engineer, and I was building the things, and then eventually transitioned to IT just because not by thing. It's just because of the job that actually put me into the IT side of it rather than the engineering side of it.
Yeah.
So I didn't choose it. It just happened. And okay, fine. It doesn't matter who I'm working with or working for. As long as I'm happy. And then, like you said, the curiosity, and then you have common sense, and then you have the skills that you can develop. And then eventually you do something better and with your life. And I think that's really, and a passion, whether you have the passion to do certain things or not, Sometimes people basically get into something and they quickly realize, like, it's not for me. And that's why I always tell people, you don't know what you don't know. So until you try.
Yeah.
So if you are thinking about doing a particular thing, and if anybody says, no, you shouldn't do it, there are only two reasons. One, either they don't know. Two, they don't want you to go that they already know. But everybody's experience is different. I know your experience is different because it's unique to your, passion or what drove you as a human being to get into what you've done. So you kind of did first a short stint at Cadence, and actually the long stint at Cadence, and then a short stint again.
Yeah.
And then there's a gap in between.
Yeah, I'll tell you the story.
Okay, tell me the story because I'm curious about it.
So I actually had been working at a company called Comdisco.
Yeah.
The division that I was working with was bought by Cadence, and so I became part of Cadence. Stayed with them a few years and then left in 2000 to go to a startup at exactly the worst time.
Yeah.
But had a wonderful experience. Actually, was at two different startups.
Yeah.
Neither of them really went anywhere, but I learned a ton and had a great experience.
I have a question, just because you talked about startups.
Yeah.
I mean, the concept of startups prior to 2000 was sort of remote. Very small number of, only database companies were the startups, because that was the only thing that people wanted to at that time really bring in. That's at least, client server and banking. But software companies were just coming because of the internet and all the other things. But then 2000, the bubble, like the whole transition change happened right after 2000. Too many startups, everything came up. Like between 98, I believe, 98 to 2000 is really where the whole technology boom really took off. So that's where your startup,
Yeah, I worked for two different startups. They were both very different. But yeah, absolutely, that was a crazy time. Companies were starting up, they were failing. I think that the VC industry was not as mature.
No,
I think
nobody was.
I think nowadays, in some ways, less companies flat out fail.
Yeah,
because the VCs are smarter, frankly.
Yeah.
But in those days, people would just start it up, it would fail, and it would disappear. But it was a great learning experience for everyone who went through it. It may have been tough at times, but it was really good. But frankly, I kind of went back to the the safe embrace of the corporate world. And when my friend from Cadence called me and said, actually, we've got something here, and I sure wish you would come back. I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's a good idea.
Cool.
I need health insurance,
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
And that actually turned out to be a great decision, because really when I came back was when my sort of corporate IT career really took off.
Yeah.
And I grew very quickly from,
quite
a
a
director
long
level.
time after that. Yeah.
Sort of director level to group director to running all of enterprise applications.
Yeah. And Cadence was booming too.
Cadence was booming.
Yeah.
We were buying companies left and right.
Yeah.
It was a great time and a great team. And then I reinvented myself.
Yeah.
And became the enterprise architect.
Yeah.
So I went from having a team of about 200 people to being an individual contributor.
So that's the thing about the enterprise roles of individual contributor, because usually enterprise architecture is not a small thing to do. It requires subject matter expertise across the organization, and you being in the business tech and then seeing all the things was probably the right candidate to do that.
It was a great opportunity, and I like to tell the story, frankly, because I think sometimes people get caught up in this idea that I had 100 people and then I need to have 200 and then I need 500, that it has to be a sort of linear progression.
Exactly.
And one of the things that we've talked about at Gainsight in the past is this idea of not a ladder, but a jungle gym, right? So you may be moving up, but you're not moving in a linear straight line. And I think it's a brilliant concept.
Yeah.
And I really think that it was so helpful for me to step aside from that big operational job, be more strategic, more architectural for a while. Eventually I came back to a more operational job. And throughout my career, I would say I've shifted a couple times. I've done the big operational job, and then I've taken, for instance, at one point I worked at Apple doing strategic consulting for a while.
Yeah.
So I've kind of gone back and forth between the operational and the pure strategic. And I think it's really good. It keeps you fresh.
Yeah.
It keeps you sharp.
Yeah, I agree.
So I highly recommend it to people.
No, I totally agree. But if you look back my career as well, when I first came out of college, there was a craze of what are you going to do and how it is. And I said, okay, I'm going to just teach, because I wanted to really improve on what I've learned. But I actually learned more when I'm teaching than actually when I'm reading. When I'm learning myself, because you have to now. You have to now repeat what you've learned.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So you see what I'm saying? So you learn a lot more cautiously. You make a lot more effort into what you did. I think the best way to teach nowadays to students is to make them teach in the class.
Absolutely.
Then automatically things will change, because they have to now learn to come prepared to basically tell what they have learned to others, so that they're actually teaching. So most people thought having students come into the classroom and then basically teach what they've learned about learning on their own, so that you can correct them is the best way to do it. I mean, at least I felt that way, because all my students, because when I started teaching them, I basically said, hey guys, I'm no different. I've learned this, and so can you. And my goal is to say how I learned this. And then so that you can actually, do it yourself. So what we do is an interesting experiment. So I'll take a chapter, I'll come back to you, and then I'll tell you how I actually present this one. So who wants to volunteer and then learn about a chapter and present it in the class? That's how I did it.
I think it's brilliant, and I think it gets to this idea too of doing something rather than academically just talking about it theoretically.
Yeah. Can you guess how many hands are actually, went up when I asked a question? One. Because it's so difficult, because people are afraid of going in front. They basically say, hey, what's happening? I can help you. I'm like, no, I can't. I get fear. I can't say, the other thing. So there's a lot of other things that can happen.
Absolutely. But it's sometimes people want advice or things. People ask, and those are the kind of things I stress, that be bold. Right? Don't
do things.
Back, right?
Do things. And then I think that really changed my career as well, because then I learned something, and that really opened up me experimenting. And I took so many risks, and like crazy, and again, unbelievable. I was in Central Europe, traveling in places where nobody wants to go, and doing things, and then just came to US. And I'm in odd places and took an odd turns to get to where I am, whatever. But I think it's important for you to go through that journey. But most of the time working with startups, like since 2000, just the way it is. Luckily, I just had a little bit better exits and then kind of path. But I think what's interesting for me today is, as I came out of the CIO CISO role, started this whole investment journey a little bit, and then worked with startups again, and then came back again into an operator role at Atomic Work, and it's fabulous. But then, as you're going through the journey, always you choose where you want to be, because you're at a point where in life you can say, hey, I don't want to get into this job, because one thing I said when I came out is everybody wanted me to come back and then become another CIO, but I said, like, okay, what am I going to be doing? And my question was, am I going to help grow, or am I going to go and optimize again? Because as you know, most CIOs jobs become majority of the time optimizing, and you're coming there to basically clean the things, and then whatever happened, I need somebody to do better, and So obviously our term life is only about 2 years, and if you spend 4 or 5 years, you're great. But then at some point you're basically, I'm doing the same thing, I want to do something else. And I think that's really what makes us changing jobs, is because you get bored of doing the same and you want to go do something differently. So now that you're spent almost like 3-4 decades of this journey, now you come out, and congratulations. Like you said, it's always a learning journey as opposed to nothing you're doing about. So now you're going to transform yourself to do something different. Help me and help us, learn what it is that your plans, what are you trying to do?
First of all, it's been an amazing journey. I've spent 7 years at Gainsight, which is a long time for a CIO. And it's because I got to have all of those different kinds of journeys, right? We were growing, we were dealing with challenges, we bought companies, things were always changing. And so it never was a static job. But I'm at a point now, as I said, sometimes I need to step away from the operational for a while. And I think I'm ready for another one of those more strategic stints. And just in my life, I'm ready to work more of a part-time kind of situation, because I've got family things and nonprofits that I work with and other things in my life I want to be able to spend time on.
That's great.
And I'm fortunate enough to be in a position to be able to do that. So I'm really shifting now back to more of a kind of consulting or CIO advisory role, and available to companies probably that are more like Gainsight was 7 years ago, who are in that growth phase, who need help. They're not big enough to hire a CIO yet, but they could use the knowledge of someone like me, both internally in terms of setting up systems and processes for scale, but also externally. So one interesting thing about my journey at Gainsight is I actually did not start there as an IT guy. So I was introduced by a mutual friend to Gainsight's CEO, and his interest was, how do I sell better to CIOs? So I think a lot of companies, especially companies where their primary persona they're selling to is not the CIO, find that the CIO blocks them, or they don't know how to speak the right language to the CIO. And so that's something that I've helped Gainsight with over the years. I've connected with our customer CIOs often. I've helped hone the messaging. And that's something I think I can do for a lot of startups who really need that help. And so I'm excited about that.
Guess what I'm doing here?
Yes, exactly.
So I think the key though, as businesses grow, I think you need, so one of the important thing about when you're in a startup is relatability. How connected are you to the ecosystem that you're trying to sell to? You're a founder and you're building things. And you're a builder, obviously you're not a seller. And you bring in the sales teams and then you go after, and then you have no idea why you're not able to sell.
Right.
Your GTM is not working. Then you go back to whiteboard again, you keep changing. But then what our founders found out, especially smart people really understand. When what Vijay said is fascinating when I asked him. It's like, Lenin, I think what I've realized is I've never sold anything to IT.
Right.
Neither my founders sold themselves. We're never connected to anyone in IT. And what's important for us as a business easy for selling to IT, we need somebody who is connected to IT.
And I think I think part of this too is just authenticity, genuineness. In other words, it's not, we didn't come up with some messaging that was theoretical or abstract. It's that we actually do genuinely understand. Right? And that's, that realness to the relationship, I think is very important. And I think more companies should frankly use the CIO network to help bring that knowledge and understanding in so that they can be better at connecting with their customers.
Absolutely. And then he started connecting to them, he's reaching out. So everybody, like, in general, that is very, very important for them as well. So I think it's a transitioning of, the phase of how you see and what is important in order to make a company really successful. Is reaching out and then connecting and then having, and I think CIOs typically are very open to, connecting and learning because they're curious, like you said. You're not on that job just to, so you're there because you're curious to, like, how can I help my organization? What is really happening out there that I can bring? And I think what you're actually about to do is amazing because I think it's going to help a lot of the founders that are actually wanting it. And I'm hoping that, they'll listen to this podcast and then reach out to you to seek your advice and help. And, in one of the things that, since you've seen the evolution of, technologies, going from, like a draconian desktops and in large computers to smallest devices that are more powerful nowadays. What we're doing. And then also the people mindset and the culture and how we're embracing these technologies inside the organizations have changed as well a little bit. But as you kind of look at the 7 years of your journey, obviously you're not only helping, organization as a CIO, but you're also helping them connect to the customers, so, as well, so that you brought that business and the as well as the CIO knowledge together, which is really, really important. But what it is that you've observed by talking to others and also within Gainsight, or anything that you could share that you're possibly is, have you seen the changes in people as well, how they're adapting to change, culture, the technology, friction? Because AI is not a small feat, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it, as we continue this conversation. But that's going to change the way how things work in organizations. But we've come through so many other transformational changes. I mean, we're humans, we can adapt, but there's also friction.
I think it'll change some things. I think some things will stay more the same than people think.
Okay.
Right? I think sometimes people look at a change like this and they say, well, this changes everything.
Yeah,
maybe. But I find I've been through a lot of technology changes.
Yes, that's why I'm asking that question.
I went through there not being a web and then there being a web. Right? I went from on-prem to cloud, right, to SaaS. So I've seen a lot of big changes, but there are some things, there's some things that have changed a lot. And there's some things that haven't changed so much. One thing that's changed a lot and continues to be, I think a tough transition for a lot of people in IT is the sort of balance of power, right? The empowerment of individual users or individual business groups to go off and fire up their own SaaS software in their team, maybe without telling IT. And, it creates a lot of tension and issues, but it's also part of how the world works right now. Look, I'm old enough that I remember when you used to have to go to some big central group to get something written for the mainframe. And then microcomputers came along and suddenly someone had an IBM PC on their desk. And they were like, watch this. I'm going to write a program. Actually, I'll tell a quick story about that. From very early in my career, where I got connected to a controller of a very large credit union. They had a very large data processing department. But he knew that I knew something about computers, and he was a progressive guy. He had an Apple II sitting on his desk, and he was like, I'm not quite sure what to do with this, but I know there's power here. I don't know exactly how to use it. So he had a project that he wanted to get done, and he had gone to his data processing group. And they had said, we need something like 6 months and $50,000 to go do that project. And he said, I'm pretty sure you could write this little program on this computer. And I said, 6 months, $50,000. I said, I can do that in 6 weeks for $5,000. Now, and he said, sure, because in his world, that was not a lot of money. Okay, if it fails, it fails. It's a good experiment, right? I did it. I had to learn as I was doing it. Obviously, like I've spent most of my life, I said, I talked myself into something and then figured out how to do it.
Absolutely, right?
But that was a huge transformation and a huge power shift from that central group out to individuals and business groups to do their own thing. Over time, IT sort of got a lot of the power back. And then we lost it again.
Exactly. So
it's a cycle, right?
Yeah, so it's a cycle, and now it's back again. This is what I was also talking to Swati earlier, and then with every other podcast I'm doing, is because of the trends in which how CIO's job becomes obsolete. Sometimes people say, everything is owned by business, we don't need a CIO permission, let's do everything. And then all this chaos, somebody needs to come and save.
Right.
And always the savior of chaos happens to be the owner, onus falls on the CIO.
Yeah.
And they bring in somebody, hey, this is all, you come in, you fix it, and then, whatever it is. And that's why I'm saying, optimize, you come in because chaos is created, now you just have to fix it.
Yeah.
And that always happens in the cycle where it becomes very, very important. But I think now they've kind of learned in organizations that without technology and ownership in the business side, it's very important, very difficult for them to do anything anyway. So I think that shift happened almost a decade ago, I would say, even at 2 decades, because as we went from data centers into the cloud, and that's when the products and engineering took a different direction altogether for growth, and the business has to move with it. Right? The speed at which they move, I'm like, hey, I can't leave you behind. So because there is a complete disconnect, you have to close the gap. And then that's where the SaaS came in, you need to do all these things fast, otherwise the business is going to slow down.
Right.
So ecosystem grew, and automatically somebody had to come and control it.
Yeah. So I think AI is the latest round of that.
That's
right. Because I think that, again, is hugely empowering individuals and groups to do a lot just with a ChatGPT license. Right.
Exactly.
But here's the thing that I think really has not changed. Right. The role of IT, to me, in a nutshell, is to be that connection between business problems and technology solutions. And that, I think, has not changed.
I don't think it will change much.
And I think AI, in some ways, makes it even more important. Right? Because people don't have the time, energy, or expertise necessarily to figure out how to bridge that gap. And that's always been our job, right? But the thing is, what do we do when someone comes to us and asks for something, right? We ask, what's the problem you're trying to solve? People tend to come to us and say, hey, can you add this field to this screen? Can you do this? Can you do that? And we say, hold on. Like what we're good at is understanding what you're really trying to accomplish, and how do we really craft a solution for you?
So that we're thinking 2 steps ahead, making sure 5 other things doesn't break, ensuring that it is done, but also done, and so that we're also taking them to the next level, as opposed to just don't fix this one, because if you fix this one, you break a few other things. But also, why am I fixing it? That means I may have to actually do some more things for you. So let's also fix all of that stuff. So I agree. I mean, they basically kind of have that view, which typically doesn't come into a person who is siloed into a particular business line. You're basically a traffic cop.
Right.
You go here, you stop here, you can't go there, this is what we need to do. But then it became what we call a little bit of a friction job, because you're controlling everything. Now everybody's like, just don't go there because they'll slow you down. Well, obviously traffic lights really slow you down. But there's a reason why. So that you don't get into an accident.
No,
which is exactly what IT role is. You're a traffic signal, and we're managing the signals, and then we're basically now, basically telling them what you can and cannot do, because these are the constraints the organization living with. Now, if you want to not go to traffic lines, then let's build a highway. So you go on a highway, and then there is no traffic line. You just get on, get off, whatever you want. But that's all it is. And so there are only two paths that you can go, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's stretching that analogy, but the problem with a highway is that it's not very agile. It takes you between two major spaces.
Yeah.
But if what you need to do is make smaller moves, more agile moves, a highway doesn't help you.
Exactly.
And so if you want business agility, you really need the ability to manage that complexity. And people need to be able to do those things. And then the question is, what is the right partnership? And I think that's the way to think about it, between IT and the business. It's never just one or the other.
I agree. I think the highway analogy also made sense for a couple of reasons. I tell you, I think you have a problem. That problem is being solved by going through this, and it's taking longer. And they say like, hey, I want to go from point A to point B. I don't want to go through these lights and signals, and everybody is blocking me. And why do I have to go so slow? I want to go there in a minute.
Right.
Okay. How can you get me there? And that's typically where we bring in a streaming system or some other thing. Okay, you can just put the stuff that you need. We'll make sure that it gets on the other side.
I don't know if I'm stretching the analogy too far, but I think that the thing is that when people talk about, I don't want the complexity of working with IT and I have to figure all this stuff out. I can make it easy for you if you can make your requirements simple. But if you want to do something complex, everyone wants a shortcut. They want the highway, but they also want to be able to do exactly what it is they want to do. They need it to meet all of these requirements. And it's like, well, there's no way around that. The only way that you can speed that up is to just pretend like it's simple and not complicated. But then to your point, you're going to do things and it's going to break something.
Yeah, that totally. I mean, there is no perfect silver bullet for a problem. There's always going to be a solution. Now, that brings me to your point of how things are transforming with AI nowadays, like how AI can help in this situation. So there's this thought process of AI is going to solve the problems. Everybody's expecting that this hype is going to do something magically, somehow AI will fix it. But that's not how reality is. Because in order for AI to work, I mean, obviously, what is AI doing is taking away some of the work that somebody is struggling with, or they're doing something that repetitively all the time, and which they don't need to and they don't want to, so they can optimize it and create it in a different way. So, I mean, the point of service management, and I'm kind of bringing back into what is the foundational thing for IT, is the traffic control. The control happens when an incident or an accident happens, somebody needs to be there. And that's what IT's responsibility is. Okay, first of all, can I avoid the accident? And can I make sure that whatever that is coming in the order so that I can basically solve the problem for you? So we're talking about, a request comes in, that request needs to go to the right people to be, solved. That means you just say, I want to go from point A to point B, and we say, okay, from here to there, you go through that, directions were given the same way, and then you go through that and then follow the lights and everything else, you get done. So the point I'm basically bringing in is that you're manning those, that type of controls is what IT brings as a process. That process is there because we have too many people, and in order to serve the people their purpose, we bring in technology to kind of, help them so that they can do things more efficiently and faster. And because of you have people and technology, and you say, oh, there's a communication problem, there is information, silos, and nobody is talking to somebody. We need somebody to manage these things. Then you invent a process to control the chaos. And so now, because of these all three coming together, it actually increases the complexity of the organization because now everything is slow. And so the point I'm basically saying is that if you want to bring AI into this kind of a situation where you have complex ecosystem, complex processes, complex business, and then you also have people that are actually lived through and grown into it. What is AI going to do in this particular situation? In your perspective, how can AI help?
Well, first of all, AI is a tool, right? So we need to be clear. You have a problem, you're going to craft a solution. Part of the solution may be process, right? We know quite often that's a big part of the solution to business problems. Some of it is going to be various kinds of technology, and AI may be one of them, right? So this is not a, I have a hammer so everything looks like a nail. This is what's the right tool to use to solve the problem. AI is an amazing tool. I think what's interesting about AI is it allows us to solve problems that we have not really been able to solve before. So I've been thinking lately about the evolution of automation. At the end of the day, everything we do is sort of automation of one kind or another.
Yeah. Or we'll automate it one way or the other.
Right. But sort of that's the value we add to the business. It's why we exist. If we weren't automating business process, what would we be doing, right? So the thing about automation is, if you think about sort of the first computer, which I would say were those cards that were in those looms in the 1700s that actually said, lift this string up and then lift this string up.
Yeah.
That was a very clear problem.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Right? I need this design to come out, and therefore I do this. And if you go from there until LLMs, literally, all of that history, what you see is better and better ways to implement what I would call rule-based automation.
Yeah.
Right? So we go from a Loom card to a programming language.
And workflows,
to
basically.
workflow engines, to integration tools, to RPA, right? So we throw all of these interesting tools, but they all require you to lay out exactly what the rules are, what the flow is, right? I think we're hitting a wall, to be honest, in terms of what we can do with technology
today
to do any more automation, because we've got great tools, but the problem is always that the business doesn't actually know what they want, right? We've all had this experience. They know what they want at a certain level of abstraction.
Yeah.
So, but they say, build me something that, automates getting invoices from people and pulls the PO. So great, you build a set of rules and you do that, and then you start using it and it breaks.
Yeah.
Because it turns out, but it's different sometimes.
Yeah.
And what you very quickly realize is there's more exceptions than rules. And so the whole
more customization is required.
Yeah, the whole rule-based concept has limits, right? Now we have LLMs. LLMs have an ability to say, you know what? You don't have to tell me the exact rules. I'm actually have this sort of simulated intelligence, which, by the way, I prefer the term simulated rather than artificial.
I agree.
But,
it's basically simulated.
I have this ability to have you give me a fuzzy set of instructions and to figure things out. I just saw a demo the other day of a startup where at one point there's a prompt given that says search for something in this application, but it doesn't know what the application is. And the LLM with the this new operator technology is able to figure out where the search bar is. You don't have to tell it. You don't have to tell it what search bars look like. It knows, right? It can figure it out.
Just like a human does.
Right. And that's a revolutionary leap, I think.
Exactly.
Because that's the piece that we couldn't do.
But we didn't imagine that it can do that, because what we thought initially was we control everything, we tell it, because we're coming from that mindset of what it is. But then what we're basically saying, the people who are building in the AI is saying is, hey, it can augment a human. It can do certain things what a human can do so that the human doesn't have to do.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want tickets to be booked and you want to fly somewhere, you want to do this in a common sense, typical things, what we do typically, if that can be also, shown how it is done, they can automatically figure it out. If we can figure it out, a machine eventually can figure it out. That's where the knowledge of agent, that agent is nothing but a human form of a person trying to do certain things. And that's why it's become an agentic AI. It's like everything has an agent for troubleshooting or doing this, doing that, each one, all these agents and all things like that's what we're talking about. So I think one of the other interesting thing we're basically trying to figure this out from atomic work standpoint is today service management is being done in a traditional way that IT controls. Hey, you come to me, this is how you need to open a ticket, and these are the information required. If you don't give me this information, I really can't solve it, or I have to talk to you. And then that change goes into a Slack channel where you're having conversations, which we talked about earlier. So now a traditional way of that we evolved into it is that, okay, there are this number of IT employees here to help the rest of the organization for their day-to-day, right? Even when the actual employees don't need to be in the office, the IT has to be, because they still control the facilities, they control the infrastructure, access, and all the other things, and so they're responsible for it. So, but the point I'm trying to get to is to service that today. How it is done is that we tell them how to do things, and then now with AI, that particular agent is 24/7 with you, no matter where you are, and they are with you in the browser of an application, they're with you on a Slack or Teams or an email.
Sure.
So now you ask something that you don't know, they're servicing you. They're basically helping you to get there faster.
Yeah. Well, I think the key thing is, again, getting to that sort of sea change of what LLMs do. You know, we've had chatbots for a long time.
Yes.
But chatbots were never very good because they were rule-based.
Yes.
And so you had to write out very precisely. It's like when you call someplace and they say, press 1 for this, press 3 for that. And you're like, it drives you crazy, right?
It's a workflow.
And the chatbots are sort of just a fancier version of that, where, you know, they're asking you a series of questions, but if you don't ask it in exactly the right way or something, it doesn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it doesn't have the context a lot. It is not intuitive, it's not reasoning with you.
It can only do things that it has been programmed to do, right? That someone has set those rules in advance. And that's why this is such a huge change. Like, so when you look at ticket management, whether it's external customer support or internal HR, IT kind of legal workflows, I think that's one of the areas where AI has the biggest influence because it's like overnight, we've basically gone from these kind of just okay chatbots to this amazing user interface where, again, the user can ask something in a sort of fuzzy way.
Yeah.
And this technology can actually understand what they're really asking and then connect that right to an answer. And it's super exciting because I think I think sometimes people think of that in terms of, we'll save money because we won't need L1 agents or something. I actually think a lot of that labor will get applied to just much higher value workloads. But I also think it's a better user experience.
Yes.
Because it is 24/7.
Exactly.
Right? It gets you an answer quickly. By the way, you know, these agents often can actually do something on your behalf. So that you don't just say, I'm locked out of my account right now. And it doesn't just say, here's the help desk article. It says, I just unlocked your account.
Yeah.
Great. As a user, I love that. I'm having a better user experience. And frankly, you know, those L1 analysts have one more repetitive kind of boring thing off their plate.
Exactly.
And now maybe I can have them do much more interesting project work that I would actually much prefer them to do. So I think it actually can be good for everybody in that equation.
Yeah. That's a great use case.
So,
You know, impact-wise, from an ROI standpoint, investing into helping your employees in getting the, you know, help faster, knowledge faster, and getting them to be self-serve, you know, so that they don't have to wait. I think that's really something that we're excited to really bring in. I think I have a question for you. Obviously, you've seen the way today's, softwares are in this particular service management space. So if you've already been a player, for a long time, and then you have to now bring AI to do something with it. As you know, as a company that is already built so much, and then so many things that are happening. Obviously we've seen why startups actually go faster and build things, and because they don't have any baggage, they don't have to worry about. I don't care I'm just building for the future. I'm just going all in and then do things. But then you also have the architectural advantage because you're now bringing something modern, something completely different that is impossible for a 2-decade-old company or even a decade-old company to really imagine. Because even 2, 3 years, 4 years ago, technology is no longer the same. I mean, there's so many changes that are happening. Do you see that as an advantage for the new startup ecosystem to really always disrupt an incumbent?
Yes and no. I mean, I think absolutely in terms of coming up with a solution that's fundamentally better than someone sort of trying to bolt something on, to an older legacy system, right? Or at least it potentially can be. I mean, I do think that, for instance, certainly at Gainsight, we've been able to take the structure of our software, which is not very old, but certainly was written originally in a pre-LLM world, and add LLM features to it very effectively, right? So it's not impossible, but I do think sometimes the startups have that advantage. I think the flip side of that, though, is it's non-trivial to rip something out and put something new in, And so, for instance, in the service management space specifically, when people talk to me about their tools and their capabilities, I'm always asking, look, can you tie this to my existing ticketing system? Because that user interface is great, but if I have to contemplate ripping out a ticketing system that's been there for a long time, it's a little scary. And it might actually be the right thing to do long term, and I might put that in my roadmap, but I'm going to think twice before I go through that kind of change, right? So I think startups need to kind of think in terms of both building that great new thing, but also building a bridge that makes it easy for their customers to transition, to get there.
So it's more like, I want to get on a highway that you're trying to build. But I can't go down to it without a ramp.
Right, exactly.
So just build a ramp for me.
Right.
I'll get on and get off.
And by the way, I need a ramp because I can't go from 0 to 65 instantly.
Yes, instantly. Right. And it's going to take me the time.
I think we're pushing this analogy.
Isn't it? It's fascinating, right? It actually with IT, you can actually bring any analogy work because we're all over the place and try to make this work. So I think one of the very interesting thing about where you're heading now with your role, you'll come across startups because you're wanting to help them to really go in front of the executives, obviously the CIO as a buyer, and they have different needs.
Sure.
And everyone comes up with, hey, I'm solving this particular area as opposed to that. Whether it is marketing related or CRM related, or it is within the enterprise, it all comes down to the CIO anyway. But how are you thinking? Given coming from the CIO role into going into this one, have you thought about how you want to approach this and like how you want to help?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the trick, I think that people need to understand in how to sell these solutions is that the practitioner that you're selling to is solving their technical problem. Right? Like, I need a better service management system. Right? That request then goes up the chain. Right? To a CIO, by the way, to a CFO, to a CEO maybe, right? Depending on the nature of it. And at that point, it's not a technical decision anymore, it's an investment decision. So this is something I'm trying to help people better understand, especially in the security space, where I think it's very easy for people to get caught up in this, hey, I'm solving this security problem. That's great, but you've got 10 things that you're saying that we need to buy to help our security. There are 10 departments that each have 10 things. So by the time that hits the CEO is looking at a list of 100 requests. And I really think it's important to have some empathy and some understanding, like, what's going on here, right? There's a tough decision that needs to be made there. And so now the question is not, is this a great tool, right? The practitioner is like, this is an easy decision. I love this tool. This solves my problem. It's not an easy decision for at a higher level, right? Where you're trying to balance 100 things and maybe you can only do 20 across the company.
There's a prioritization requirement. There is also where you spend, what problem we want to solve.
Right.
There's a cost constraints, there's a budget constraints, there's operational constraints, risk constraints. There are a lot of other things you need to consider into,
So when you're making those kind of higher level decisions, whether it's a CIO level or above, now I need to know different kinds of things. I need to understand, what kind of business value is this adding? Is it adding value on the revenue side, on the efficiency side? Is it improving my customer NPS, my employee NPS, right? I need to understand those kind of things. It's a different set of criteria than the people doing maybe the software selection are looking at,
Yeah.
right? They're at a different level.
Yeah.
So I think part of the trick, and by the way, this is whether you're a vendor trying to sell internally or you're a CIO trying to figure out maybe how to sell it internally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's all the same stuff. It's about translating to the next level up to what they care about and what they appropriately care about. I think a lot of people, I've seen this, they kind of feel like, well, why doesn't the CEO care about this?
Yeah.
You know, I've got this big security problem I'm solving. Why doesn't everybody get excited about that and say, oh, we'll give you all the money you need? It's like, because there's 10 different departments and they're all coming with equally important stuff. They're all saying the company depends on this.
Yes.
Right? Well, but we can't do all of it. And so at some point you've got to be able to have a different kind of business decision conversation.
And you can help basically showcase that, how to navigate that.
Yeah.
For the founders. And then also on the other side, you're also now, helping advise the CIOs and others and connections and then talking to them.
And I think it's something like vendors need to understand how to help the people that they're selling to sell it internally.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So you're talking to the head of the help desk, but that person may need some coaching from you.
Yeah. And how to
usually it looks like a value engineering process or something,
exactly.
right? But like, let us help you structure this so that you can make the sell to your CIO, and then help your CIO make the sell up the chain as far as it needs to go, right?
It's a much needed. It's on both sides. It's much needed, and I think I can totally see that. And so one of the interesting thing, and we've been talking about it since last year. We've been doing the events, and then you've seen how the startups that I'm bringing together to really have the CIOs interact with them, and then the things that evolved into. And I want to also, bring awareness of this global CIO circle that we're trying to build. Congratulations and thanks for joining. So to help it, because I think this is exactly the mission that we're talking about: helping the founders, helping the buyers on the other side, the CIOs, to understand what it takes to really prioritize and how it needs to be internalized. An innovation that is coming your way, and how are you going to plan on taking this into justifying this is actually better than whatever we're doing? How is that gonna, really help them really take that into and business justification? Yeah. On the other side, the founders like preparing for how you make that pitch to make sure that that pitch resonates, to justify them. I think there's a bridge that there's a ramp needs to be built.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you creating this network. I always say I couldn't do my job without my network. CIOs help each other so much. And I gotta be honest, it's the best thing about being a CIO, I think, is being part of that community. Yeah. And just the tremendous support that we give each other is wonderful. And those kind of networks are just critical to us being able to do our jobs. Learn from each other, right? We don't all have to go make the same mistakes, right? We can learn from each other and all get better. And I also really think that vendors are such an important part of our modern ecosystem. I feel like sometimes there's been a sense in the past, I think, of vendors almost as being the enemy, in the sense that you just want to negotiate really hard with them. The main thing is to pay them as little as possible. Yes. But I hate that approach. I mean, I understand there's a hard negotiation that may have to happen. Absolutely. But then once that's done, these are truly your partners. Yes. In the modern world,
that's a great point.
You need that kind of strong relationship.
Partnership is so important, because you need to make sure that you're looking after each other when the actual thing happened. Yeah. You don't want, blame happens and all the other things. You need to look out for each other to try to fix the problem, take ownership, accountability, and then eventually you get to, because there's nothing really perfect in this world. Obviously, things can break. Yeah. And, things can happen. So the only way that works is that when you have a good partnership and a good relationship, then it actually simplifies.
Well, I think the other thing is our vendors have this great opportunity to see lots of different companies, right? So you have this visibility and this understanding that I can never have, because I don't see hundreds of companies.
You're inside.
I'm inside my company. Yeah. And so you can bring to me so much like best practice, right, that I could never figure out on my own. Yeah. And so, the best vendors, I think, really bring that extra value. They don't just say, here's the software I'm selling you. Yeah. They say, no, I'm also selling you because you're my partner, part of what you're getting from this relationship is connection to other CIOs, best practices, white papers, all kinds of content that's like actually super valuable.
Yeah,
So,
and also feedback, right? Obviously when you're a builder, when you're an innovator, the purpose of the whole CIO circle that we're thinking, as we're ideating it, it's CIOs are internal innovators. They're business, champions. They're trying to basically optimize and innovate and advance the business needs. And they need to be always at the forefront of seeing what's coming and how it needs to be brought in, and then so that I can help my employees and my business to grow. And then on the other hand, people who are building, like the vendors you're talking about, the founders, they're innovating by looking at what are you struggling with?
Right.
What is the business, doing? So people sometimes that are actually in that space coming out and building a product because they've seen it enough that, hey, I'm a builder. So I'm there in that ecosystem, see a problem, why don't I just come out and build it because I can't build it inside because it's not conducive, it's not something that's entrepreneurial, so I'm going to go and build a company. And that's how most of the entrepreneurs actually started coming out and building because they've been in a problem. They say, why do I have to be in this situation? Why can't I just go fix it? Not only for them, if one customer is having this problem, there are probably 10 others having the same issue.
Yeah.
So I think that's...
You're right, it's very much a two-way street.
Yeah.
I think it's very challenging, and I know this because I've been inside of a B2B SaaS company for the last 7 years. You need to listen to your customers, right?
Yeah.
That communication has to go both ways, but it can be a little tricky, right? Because you want to be customer driven and kind of responsive to your customers' needs, but you'll also have 10 customers ask you to do 10 different things.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky balance, but there's no question that if you're not
And that's where the advisor comes in to help basically, hey, you need to distill it further. And that's where the CIO advisory, that experience of coming from the business side, and when you have 10 choices for the founder to really make a change, right? I'm thinking about this feature. I'm thinking, hey, slow down. I don't think this is really important for me. And I can basically prove it to you by bringing 2 or 3 of my other colleagues that actually, we're all together, we're discussing about this. Why don't you just come and pitch it for me? So there's that,
Yes, it's a great dynamic. I've been on a few customer advisory boards, and they're a great idea, and anyone who's a B2B SaaS company should have a customer advisory board.
Right.
But you've got to moderate it and kind of synthesize the information carefully to figure out what should you really take from that. Yeah. Where again, it's an investment decision, right?
Absolutely.
And those are hard. Yeah. But highly critical. Companies that don't listen to their customers carefully get themselves in trouble. Yeah. Right. They spend time and energy building stuff that doesn't really move the needle. Yeah. They move in the wrong direction or they miss things that are actually really important. Yeah. I think an example of that, something that I think Gainsight did really well many years ago, like a lot of companies, you build features and you're pumping out features, right? But at some point, you start talking to your customers, and what you hear over and over is, the administrative side of this is terrible. Because, of course, that doesn't get any attention. All the attention goes to the sexy front-end stuff, right? And so we actually had a big internal project, and I was so proud of the company. I was like, wow, I never heard of anybody doing this. Yeah. That was like, you know what? We're going to improve admin experience. Yeah. So I was like, this is brilliant. But this is the kind of thing that you could miss that signal. Yes. Right? But if you're really listening to your customers, you realize, there's this thing, maybe it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but this is really going to make our customers happier. Yeah. And that's what matters. Yes. Like, we need to add value. Yeah. I think every problem that you see in one place, there's a potential that problem persists in other places, and then you can actually solve that one at a time. And then prioritizing which problem to solve and bringing that into roadmap, making sure an advisory board reviews that and then say, don't do those things and help with this. And I think that's where the founders become very, very, and the products become much more efficient in coming out and then become very valuable. Yeah, one of the tricks to this, it occurs to me as we're sitting and talking about it, is who's on that customer advisory board, right? Because, for instance, we wouldn't have gotten that signal from our admins if we hadn't listened to them. Yes. Right? If all you talk to is CIOs, they may be too high up, right? You may need a mix of different levels of people so you can get some of the experiences on the ground. Yes. get the experience, what the perspective is from the higher level. They all matter.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that
there's a strategic direction level, and there is an execution priority level, and the feature set feedback that, how you use it, like what are the ways you think about it.
Yeah.
So there's like the users who are actually using it, and the inputs from there is really critical on how do you build the building blocks.
Yeah.
But then there is a strategic aspect of, okay, if I go down this path, then this is how I'm going to build it. I think the advisory board is more about strategic vision around, okay, I need to be in 2 years from now there. And these are all the features that I'm thinking about building, and this is my roadmap for this year. Then you say, okay, hang on. Why is this particular feature so important as opposed to that one?
Right.
But then you go into the actual building side, then you talk to the end users, then get their feedback on how they actually use it, and then so that you can actually build it the way that they will be really helping, helping them.
But you've got to do both, right?
Yeah.
Because the individual users need to like using the application, they need to be advocates for you. That's great.
Yeah.
But you also need to know what the executive thinks, right? Because if the executive doesn't care, right? Like they're like, that's great that the usability is great, but I'm not getting the report out of this that I need.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm interested in the insights. Like I want to know what it does to me.
Right. So the danger there is that executive now sees you as sort of a commodity.
Yeah.
Like I could just put something else there and whatever. I'm not getting my reports anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't really care. The flip side of that is the executive's getting the output that they need. They're getting the dashboard or whatever, right? Then if someone comes along and says, hey boss, I want to change my service management system, they'll be, whoa, I've got this great dashboard. I love it.
Yeah.
And they're
you need to give it to me or, figure a way to get it.
If you want to be sticky as a vendor, you've got to figure out how to make everybody happy at every level.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a very tough job to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of ways to skin, this problem. And I think I'm happy that you're coming into the other side to help. I think another person to count on, and then welcome to the founder side, and now become this way to help both sides. And then I think that's I'm enjoying it. And together, I think with the circle that we're creating and bringing other CIOs of the similar interests to help similar ways is I'm looking forward to it. And Karl, this has been a pleasure. I couldn't have had this conversation any other way. I think this has been a pleasure of having you and bringing the geeky side to the strategic side of the equation, and the highway analogy and the streets, and then the how we police it in a way. Yeah. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has really been a fun conversation, and I love this kind of sort of deeper conversation that makes me think of new things, and gets my creativity going. So this was really fun.
I'm excited about what's coming from your side. And so thank you for everybody joining. This is an amazing conversation with Karl. Karl, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.